gives me great pleasure to bring this session to you today. And before we start, I just wanted to acknowledge the Malakadi people on whose land we're sitting on at the moment, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. And just take a moment to think about Indigenous foodways and the importance of First Nations knowledge and epistemologies and how that intersects with the work that we're all doing in the world. And I think it's a really exciting time for us as Australians to start reconciling those two things and creating a vibrant food system for everybody. So, So we're going to talk about no dig, no spray, no crops. Question mark. It's a question. So we've got Bruce and Tim. They're going to introduce themselves and probably talk for about 10 minutes each on what they're up to in the world. But we're going to basically have a look at, how do we marry the desire to use fewer inputs and less tillage with the need for yield and to produce crops and so-called feed the world. We just had a session earlier where Peter, the scientist, said we had to double our production by 2050, which I don't think we do, but given population projections. But it is on the minds of government policy at the moment. How do we produce more to feed the world? And do we need to rethink the crops we grow? So that's a pertinent question. And also, what are the different ways of doing that that's working right now and maybe future-proof, for a resilient food future for all of us. So Bruce, I might start with you. If you could tell the crowd, you really don't need any introduction. I think you're very well known in this space. But if you could just tell those who don't know you a little bit about your history, what gave you the ideas that you've developed over the years in the first place, like what was the epiphany, and how you're doing that now.
Very good, thank you. And yes, and so you might have gone the grey hair, but I've gone the no hair after. So I've been at and around this for longer, and I've really got to compliment the work that you guys have been doing, and Food Connect. Make sure that is something you Google up, because it's been truly inspirational what they've been doing as well, and so that it's in some ways a great way to start too, to think that we'll be talking mostly about sort of the production system side, which making the assumption that's where you're most interested in, but there's all the other bits as well, because if you just get the production system changed, then there's still all the rest of the bits to get right to the consumer, and if those bits of the chain aren't working, well, then we've just got an interesting philosophical idea, that's all. And so some of those will tease out. So my background from central west New South Wales, about an hour west of Dubbo on the flat plains of the central west. So it gets nice and hot and arid summers. In the early 90s, changed our grazing management, and that was kind of an epiphany as far as spurring us on to other things, because our place radically changed for the better with the implementation of that. I'm a bit of a hoarder, really, of plagiariser, if you like, of ideas. Any good ideas in ag from anywhere, even from the town drunk down the end of the bar or anything. We'll take them all, because they're all things that we can keep on working on, and some of those bits don't always fall at that moment, but they're an important part later on, which is part of sort of my journey. So we changed our grazing management, and that tripled our livestock production. All the while, our paddocks just started to do all sorts of wondrous things in terms of diversity, and we're seeing plants and animals that we hadn't ever seen before, and my father hadn't seen in his time, and so forth. So that was really, really interesting that we were getting a both, because that's a really strong theme from me. Try and not fall into the either or. Oh, okay, it's either environment or business. Well, no, because that's not hardly creative at all. In the middle there, but don't forget the social bit, which we always have to put first, because if I'm starting to talk about any sort of a system here from this point, if that's not something that you can work in with your program, it's not for you. And that's the starting point with anything. So anyhow, we saw major changes in our paddocks, but up till then we'd been doing direct drilling of crops into our farm, which the definition of that is a full disturbance, so just one pass with the machine planting after the rains. But the trouble with that was it was taking our paddocks back down to ground zero. So our grazing management was taking up like that, but then we were doing a cropping and taking it back that way. And so it was only sort of 2 or 3 seasons later that I said, well, I've got a choice here. Really, why am I? That's a contrary fight here as the system thinks. So I did burn the bridges. I sold all our farming equipment, all our trucks and headers, and the whole shebang that we had, and jumped out into the unknown. But my idea was, well, I want to be able to grow crops out in a diverse grassland, because that's what we were restoring literally from cropped out ground that had 80 or 100 years of cropping and loosened pastures and those sort of treatments and lots of heavy grazing, and go and sow into that. So that's where no-kill cropping came from, and so we can, and I won't sort of rest on that at the moment. We'll let Tim have a go here in a moment. But that's what came out of that. The idea was, how can we grow our annual plants that we want to actually harvest in amongst a grassland without taking the grassland backwards? So that's no kill there as far as a theory. And we've found out you can, and you can do it repeatedly, and you can do it year after year. Okay, with a different set of expectations, which we'll explore a little bit later on. But that led me on to work for time directly for Landcare with grazing management as an independent grazing management specialist, because once again my hoarding of all the ideas. I'm always keen to talk grazing management with folks, but not from any one of the 3 themes alone. My gift to everybody is, get all of the toolboxes, and you decide which toolbox or toolboxes you're relying on at any one time, or tools they're out. And then a bit later on, for the catchment management authorities, I was a farming systems officer for a period of time. And nowadays I travel over Australia a lot to the pastoral lands with animal behaviour work in self-herding. And I mention all of those things because they're inextricably linked. When we look out the doors of the tent here, it's an interaction here of the biology that we're placing on top of the soil with the stuff that's underneath the soil level. And so maximising that is the without reliance on external non-renewables like fossil fuels or money or other people's labour, etc., is an emphasis that we might explore out of the whole system. So I'll pass on to Tim now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bruce. My name's Tim. I'm from my extended family is in farming, but I'm very much a city boy, and as you can probably tell. But I sort of got deep into the sustainability world, sort of doing the research, reading the books, watching the documentaries back when I was sort of in my early 20s. And I guess I sort of started to understand that we're just, the way we're producing our just resources and food in general is just incredibly unsustainable. I think we consume about 1.7 Earth's worth of resources every year. So it's obviously very much unsustainable, and we've got a growing population that we need to sustain. So I sort of went down this rabbit hole and discovered hemp and saw hemp as this potential tool in our belt to try and solve the current sort of climate problems that we're currently facing. And sort of started in this journey down in hemp about 8 years ago, and sort of saw it as this potential opportunity for farmers as a new alternative cash crop. And as a way to help sort of replenish and improve soil structure as well, just from the one crop. And we had this sort of, I guess we had this ideal early on that we wanted all organic production. We wanted to be fully organic, but we started to realize that with any new crop, it's very hard to, one, get people to grow a new crop in the first place, let alone convince them to then change their entire cropping and agricultural system on their farm to grow it the way that we wanted it. So we decided to just really focus on sort of what impact could we have with hemp and where is the impact that hemp can be within a farming system. And it turns out it's a really great crop in rotation because, one, it's a very short growing window, so it's only about 120 days or so to actually go from seed to harvest. And it works really well in a lot of different systems. So specifically in Tasmania, farmers can have pasture and they can cut silage, during the September and October months when it's really growing quickly, and they can sow hemp in November and harvest in March, and then have enough time after harvest to put pasture back in and have enough time for that pasture to grow in time for winter. So they've still got the ability to feed that off in the winter time. So so I was lucky enough to be awarded a Churchill Fellowship in 2019. I was meant to go in 2020, and then obviously pretty hard to do in the global pandemic. So I started in late 2022 and traveled through 9 countries and just to study the global hemp industry, sort of the things that are limiting the industry from reaching its potential, and sort of just trying to understand where Australia is well positioned to sort of play a role in the future of the industry. And I'll try not to go too deep into hemp because I feel like if I start talking about hemp, I'll never stop talking about hemp. But it's this incredible crop, very versatile. You got very, it's as I said, fast growing, but you can get multiple commodities from the one crop. So you can use the seeds for food, really highly nutritious food source. You can use the stalk for fibers, whether it's for clothing or geotextiles or for building materials. And then the sort of green leafy biomass matter can actually be extracted into therapeutics as well. So it's a very versatile crop. It has the germplasm's very plastic, so you can actually grow it from all the way down southern Tasmania all the way up to the tropics. So it's got a potential to be incorporated into almost all farming systems. And dry land works in more northern hemisphere where there's snow melt, so you can sow into moisture. But there's work being done in Australia now to try and find varieties that work in dry land systems. So we should be able to integrate hemp, throughout Australian agriculture going forward across the country. So yeah, it's a really good opportunity to have an impact on the soil, but then also create really sustainable commodities that can replace these as an alternative to the unsustainable raw materials that are entering our supply chains currently.
Fascinating. Yeah. Okay. So, Bruce, you mentioned adjusting expectations as you go along. So I'm guessing it wasn't a smooth transition for you at all. And so I'm interested in that journey because obviously, but you both probably can speak to this actually. Starting something new when everyone else around you is looking at you like you're the new weirdo on the block. How did you navigate that, and how did you internally also adjust your expectations around what you were doing?
Yes, that's always a good question for all of the speakers and practitioners, and especially coming in with new and novel, as it were, an ancient plant, but suddenly it's novel. Oh God, we rediscover a lot of things, don't we? Really, and ain't that the truth? I guess probably a half funny little anecdote about the start of No Kill was I hadn't worked it all out or anything, but as I said, I'd sold all the conventional machinery, and then okay, well, what are we going to do here? Because we'd still like to grow some oats and stuff. So we put together an old combine, but at the time, so we're talking back in 1995, we bought some newfangled straight-running coulter discs out of America, and so put them together in January. So in the middle of our nice hot summer out our way, and it's all bone dry and everything. And so we put the machine together and then just gave it a bit of a test run in the paddock to see what would happen, and chucked a bit of seed in, and lo and behold, it was putting the seed in the ground. And it was sort of one of those father-son conversations. I said, "Oh, Dad, it's putting in. Why don't we sow ahead of the autumn break?" And he walked away. He was big enough to come around later on, I might say, but and I was stubborn enough to do a couple of 100 acres dry, and then when the autumn break rains actually came, we sowed as normal after the rain into moisture. That's what you did, wasn't it? And lo and behold, that first year, a huge difference in the stuff that had been sown dry and so ready to fire as soon as the rains came. It was so much more competitive than anything I did after the weeds had the head start. So there, it was only later that I really started to think about that as a system sort of based thing, and how no-kill actually starts to sit out on a different branch of the tree from all other broadacre cropping systems, in that it's predicated on more diversity, whereas all other systems, to one degree or another, are actually about simplifying it, okay? And that's for perfectly valid reasons. You're trying to maximise whatever thing you're growing, and therefore you take away competition or give it a leg up by additional substances. All of that works. We don't really need to take a value judgment on any of that. That's my view now, because it's not really an either-or proposition. It's just intensity added to extensiveness is our problem. So if I dive in for a moment and just take us to the Amazon and think about, for quite a few thousands of years, people have been doing slash and burn in those forests, and that has added to the total diversity of that forest. But now, of course, with our great big machinery, it's being done en masse. It's probably going to tip some systems over in a whole planetary sense. So there we are with farming systems. It's not only related to what you do, but it's also the scale that you do it at. Okay, and so if I just sort of finish off on the change part, that's the more broader thing. It's so easy in ag to start talking about practices. What sort of machine did you use? How, when did you do it, and all that, which is all relevant, all part of it. And if you don't understand that, you're likely to fail, because each system is going to be different, but not systemically. What are you aiming for? Because and so one part of my long journey now, I don't even like to use the term regenerative. Way back 25 years ago, when Col Seiss and Angus Morris and I were going around Australia talking about pasture cropping and no-kill cropping, which are different. So if you don't, that sort of thing, we had caps made of profitable regenerative agriculture. But I don't use the word regenerative now. I would prefer to put it to you that whatever future you want, I would hope that you are looking for something that is desirable and plentiful, and systems that drive desirability for the humans and more plentiful outcomes.
Tim, how do you navigate?
Being a weirdo is interesting. The hemp industry especially, it's as you can imagine, it's full of all kinds of characters, and it's got a very strong stigma attached to it, which unfortunately is from the the very strong Nixon campaigns of the 1960s and 70s of demonizing cannabis, and it's going to turn you into a crazy person, and there's just some wild things that were said, and now that's very ingrained in the psyche. So I find myself walking into meetings with politicians or regulators, and it's always this conversation of like, can you get high from it? So that you basically have a 30-minute meeting, and 20 minutes of that meeting is explaining the difference between hemp and marijuana, and then you get like this tiny little section of trying to get to what you're trying to do in the industry to move it forward. So yeah, that's just a constant restriction on the industry kind of reaching its full potential. And yeah, I think going to farmers who are fairly conservative as well, as you should be as a farmer, to keep that farm profitable and if in your family for generations. That's the way you survive, and you do it properly. You go to them and you say, hey, you want to grow some hemp, and like their mindset of hemp is the drop kick kid who's smoking weed or smoking bongs or something, and doesn't do anything with their life. It's very hard to sort of convince them and get them on track to understand the benefits of the crop and what it can do for their system. But Yeah, I think the stigma is definitely eroding. We have the internet now, so it's pretty hard for the truth not to come out, which has really been positive for the industry. And there's a lot of research and stuff as well, which has been both on the high THC stuff, but then that's opened up our eyes to the benefits of hemp too. And so now it's really, farmers just want to know. There's sort of a lot of farmers are past the sort of hemp issue. It's more, how do I grow it? What's my gross margin going to be? And sort of how does it fit into my rotation? And all the things you want to be asked when you're trying to get people to grow a crop for you. So yeah, it's still challenging. Still regulators are still pushing back on things that they shouldn't. There's a lot of red tape involved, but yeah, I think you just got to keep pushing forward, basically. Yeah.
Let's go a bit deeper into the some of the things that you're doing, Bruce, around, you mentioned self-herding and other interesting concepts. Can you dive a bit more deeper into that for us?
Yeah, so let's talk about it from a systems point of view. Apart from making money or liking the fact of having animals on your place, why would we have animals out in the landscape? Well, they're recycling tools, aren't they? Recycling and disturbance tools. And so if we really distill grazing management down, it's really just down to two things. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about the wallabies that you seem to have a few of around here from place to place, or cattle, or birds, or kangaroos, or whatever you want to. There's only really two factors. It's total population, but the other one is distribution across the landscape. Okay? And that is where it all boils down to. So what's distribution? That's about habits and behaviour, essentially. So funnily enough, we're creatures of habit, and so are they. And so if we just let the animals go out in the paddock in the same old way, well, don't be surprised that they're going to keep on repeating the habits that over and under utilise parts of that landscape. And then, of course, the vegetation starts to change in response to that, which reinforces patterns of degradation or, in some places, improvement. But generally, it's overuse that's our real enemy, isn't it? And so if we just say, yeah, well, they'll do their cow thing or they'll do their sheep or goat thing, that's fine. They will, but they'll be creatures of habit. And unless we actively intervene to even that out, well, then we're not getting the maximum productivity of the landscape, but also we're actually making it that we will get degradation, even at low stocking rates, because of just habits. So the self-herding part of things, and it's more pronounced in, if you can imagine, in pastoral areas, because you're dealing with larger areas. So therefore, their concentration in onto water points and that sort of thing, effect on the landscape, is a much more marked thing than if we were talking about paddock sizes that we have out the windows here. So that's the exciting bit, but you can still use it for a wide variety of other reasons. But it's an amplifier, and that's why I get a little bit excited about it, because it's not another thing that people say, oh well, it's it's either this or it's either that. No. It's actually a way of implementing grazing management where you can't usually do it. So we look on your wonderful topography here and think about some rough hills and that sort of thing, where you're never going to go and put fences, but you want to, even just for ecological purposes, get some grazing management control over that. Well, you can get the animals by choice to move about the landscape, okay? And instead of being put there by force behind the babysitters of the fences we put up. So it's an enabling behavioural response for systemic change that otherwise how can happen. And that is probably something we'd sort of think about when we're referring back to cropping situations and everything. Where are we as an industry? We've got the wide scale, and my perception is that we've got the ends of our industry rapidly going away from one another as far as conversations. I might suggest that the people here generally at this gathering are going to find it quite hard to talk to somebody down at the pub that's throwing everything at their farming system. But once again, no value judgment on any of that. There shouldn't be, because because we couldn't even have a conversation. But it's getting a bit tricky in the broad acre grain production in particular. And something I said yesterday is that in central New South Wales there's some really, really big yields, sort of once in a lifetime type situations in a number of areas in the centre of the state and that sort of thing. So, yep. But those guys aren't doing cartwheels. That's really, really, I'm finding it very, very interesting. It's not just the usual whinging cocky, bloody costs are going up again, that sort of thing. But they've got massive yields, and it should be the year that you're really, really excited. We're going to get a new car or whatever the response is. But it's generally not out there at the moment. So that is showing a more rapidly, especially on the economic side, an increase there. And I must pass over, but just the other thing I'd say with systems, there's some systems that externalise more than others. And so in a modern cropping system, we've got a real issue that hasn't been faced, and this is once again not judgmental, it's something we're all going to have to deal with, is that when you're applying ag chems in a broad scale, right, they externalise much further than if we were using the exact same product in your backyard if you were just hand spraying it, right? So we've really got to expand our minds out a bit more than, just calling something, pick glyphosate or something, is it evil or is it great? Well, that's like sort of saying, well, antibiotics, evil or great? Well, depends how we use that tool. And the big trouble is, and the proof in the landscape throughout the other island, which I'm from, over there, is that we've got a lot of externalisation, tens and sometimes hundreds of kilometres from point of application. That's blanketing our landscape, and the great defoliation is upon us. So I'm sort of just, not to deaden everything, but that is a really big thing that's affecting all of our food production systems, because it doesn't really matter where. I haven't travelled extensively enough on this good island to make much of a judgment yet, but through the ag regions of the mainland, it is clear there is no refuge. If you want to be doing something that isn't impacted by passive chemical exposure, well, bad luck. You're going to get it anyway. If you don't want to get it, you go out the pastoral lands. You can go straight out there and see the same species thriving there. So anyway, I'm probably taking us away a little bit from where you wanted to go, but it's still just trying to think about, analyse systems so that you come to the best choice.
Tim, do you want to just have a chat to us about the benefits of hemp, just in terms of chemical use and land management? I mean, what does it have any different benefits to, planting pea or something else instead of hemp?
I'd say one of the benefits of hemp is this is a very low input crop, which is good on two folds. Obviously, environmental benefits is one part of that, but then the actual cost to produce it is quite low. So you're talking about there's at the start you sow your crop, and you might do a knockdown prior to sowing, and then post sowing you basically do one broadleaf spray for weeds. It's in a standard conventional system, and that's it. Because it's such a fast-growing crop, if you give it a head start, it will outcompete, and it gets canopy closure and blocks out the sun, so it will outcompete weeds. So in organic systems, it's just just tilling. They just go through with just a finger tiller, and inter-row tilling, and that's enough. A couple of passes with that is enough that they don't actually even need to use that broadleaf spray at the start of the season. So you can definitely grow it really sustainably. It's great for farmers because it's low input in comparison to, say, growing potatoes, which is about $20,000 or so just to get a successful crop out of the ground, which is incredibly high risk for farmers. And so, I think the way that we grow it as well, there's a lot of work being done in how can we actually grow it through no-till systems, and that work it can work. There's a guy in the US that's doing that successfully in Pennsylvania. So he's going through and he's crimping his alfalfa crops, and then he's actually direct drilling into those crops, and he's having a lot of success in fibre. We've tried that in Tasmania, and it's just really challenging with the amount of moisture that you have in Tasmania. And so, some of the best farmers we've worked with, he's tried it and ended up with slugs and things in the paddock, and then grew a crop the next season in that same paddock and didn't have any problems with slugs. So, he's kind of clued onto that. Maybe it just doesn't quite work in Tasmania. But what he does, which is what I see the future, is companion cropping. So he sows with his hemp crop. He actually sows either into clover or with clover, while he's planting. So then he gets the sort of nitrogen fixation of the clover, but then once he harvests, he has an immediate feed source for grazing his livestock. So there's ways to integrate it. We're still learning. It's very early days. We're still trying to learn how we're going to grow it the most sustainable way and what method is best for each production system. But yeah, I think there's promise anyway. There's some people having some really good success with different methods. Yeah.
Well, I think we might hand it over to questions now. So anyone got anything on their mind? Yes?
My name's Garden from Stoner Brewing. I just had a question for Bruce. I've heard of your no-kill cropping and very impressed with it. Obviously it's being used for pasturing and for grazing animals. And I just wanted to ask a broad question around have you found any parts of the market for brewers or distillers or maltsters? How does it compare to the general broadacre cropping systems for barley and things like that? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so the question was pathways to market to brewers and maltsters. Yeah, and how does that compare to other more conventional commodities?
Yes, it's a great question, and we've been doing some little bit of work, and I won't mention with the folks because they might be competitors of yours. Wildflower Brewing with Topher and crew down there, and then AP Bakery down in Sydney as well, and early days and a lot of inquiry. Too. So we're still teasing out, if you like, the next bits of the chain to make it actually economically worthwhile, because there's a difficulty there in little lots, because you guys don't want 80 tonnes from us. That's going to be a bit of a problem holding that in a warehouse in the city. Early days, but the one thing that we are sure of, and I'm sure of from my work closely with Fred Provenza and Utah State University over the sort of last 15 years, is that if we grow organisms, whether they be plants or animals, in complex settings, they exhibit complex characteristics. And that, I think, without all the complete science to support that, I'll take that to home, that's what we're going to get. So that for me is exciting, because then we're starting to deal with a local provenance that's actually not only worth something to me, but potentially worth something to you. So, the taste of my grain grown in the complex thing might be absolutely rubbish, or it might be that strong that it's not to a modern consumer taste bud selection. It might have been something as a bitter beer or something, decades ago. It was acceptable, just like when apples were more tart in those days, but now we're used to them very sweet. So, that's really where there's a wonderful key for the uptake of this sort of stuff around Australia to actually keep, pleasingly from my point of view, small and medium-sized farmers, because if you're in grain production and you're small now and your grain just goes in the big heap down at the combined silos, what's the point of being small? You've got no advantage whatsoever and all the disadvantages. Local provenance is your only way, in my view, to have some reason for somebody to pay something more for your truck of barley. So I think the maltsters, even more so than the flour millers, are probably our first step, because the flavours of complexity that are going to come out of that are probably going to be easier picked up through that sort of process than be picked up through a regular flour, even though I think the characteristics are there. And of course, we can't know what those characteristics are even, right? It just, it tastes better or whatever, but it's a range of thousands of different phytochemicals that the plants have put into this thing, and so which one are you testing for? And kind of who cares? But I think in our grain growing regions at the moment, it's really a very fast obliteration where it can be. There's huge conglomerations now, and we're losing our farming families out of our communities, so therefore our communities are collapsing. And I think this is a pathway as long as there's a reasonable difference. And so, if you're just growing some ancient variety of barley or something out there, but it's being grown conventionally, well, there's a little bit of a benefit there, but so what?
Anyone else up the back?
I'm sure I'm not the only one that's getting thirsty, but the Tasmanian hemp beer, is that anything to do with your team, and do you know how that's made?
So the question is around Tasmanian hemp beer.
So that's another Tim in the hemp industry that's making that. But I think they just contract brew that locally, and I think it's a blend, so it's not 100% hemp. It's got a little bit of hemp seed and a little bit of hemp seed oil mixed in, and you definitely you taste a little bit, but it's quite a smooth. It's like quite a I guess like a heavier beer, but it's actually really quite nice. Like it's almost like a silky kind of beer. So it's all locally produced and locally made. Yeah. I think there's also Young Henrys is another group that have made some hemp beers. I think the Stonewood Boys have also made hemp beers in the past as well. So there's a potential avenue there as well. But yeah, it's just and there's also some gin as well. There's gin being made with hemp, some vodkas being made with hemp as well. So has a unique flavor profile, and I think especially in these sort of micro distilleries and things where people are looking for a unique selling proposition and they want to differentiate themselves from like the large players. There's a few people having success in that space just by having this as almost like a marketing tool. Yeah, point of difference. Yeah.
So Tim and Tim, are you like the Cheech and Chong of the hemp industry? Sorry, the guy in the plaid shirt, there's a man behind you we'll go to first and then we'll go to you. No? Oh, I thought you put your hand up. Oh, sorry. Plaid shirt, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question for Bruce. So you were talking before about your transition to going into no spray and how good the direct drilling was. But I'm curious, just in terms of the topic of this conversation and what you were saying before about don't be an either-either person and try to find those middle grounds, like don't be one or the other. What challenges have you found since going, no deal? And how do you feel about some of the technologies that are coming about spraying, such as spot spraying or hormonal spraying for specific species that might help to reduce those blow-off effects that you were talking about before as well?
So the question was, what other kinds of spraying are available? Is that or technologies? Yeah, to mitigate new spray technologies. Okay.
Yep. A really great question, and thank you. And yes, because I think we back to sort of the broad analysis for a moment is that we shouldn't stop refining what we have and doing better by spot sprays or more selective that we can. The more that we can narrow our impact is the same as us being more sensible with antibiotics in general. So, I'll call that out. In our livestock industries, there's no way that our industry should ever have been allowed to just blanket put in antibiotics into feed. Like, how bad a blowback is that going to come back to us? The experts are all saying that, great, we're breeding superbugs, a tool that could have lasted us much longer. We've shortened the effectiveness by just using it in an inappropriate way. So that's where I'm not a zealot about sprays, nor necessarily any tool that we have. We live in a modern world, can't escape from it, but we really do need to address the fact, especially with compounds that aren't degrading, and that's the real thing. When they're externalising, so back to the, if you're doing like you've suggested, the spot spray, especially with weed detector stuff, people might know about that. So it's actually detecting single weeds and just spraying the individual weeds as it goes around. That is so totally different than us flying a plane over the top with the same set of chemicals, and we're going to have to put on a higher quantity to get the same result too. Same set of chemicals, but different. So that externalisation is the real issue here, because it's not just now a question anymore of you can run your system on your side of the fence and I can run mine. Because if it's coming over here, that's like saying, right, well, I don't mind if you set a fire there or whatever, but if it burns all of my place, then it's not just your issue anymore. Or if you're going shooting and there's bullets coming and hitting me. So it is exactly the same, if you like, a serious right to farm issue that, I don't seek to impose on others, but we've got to recognise when those effects are coming out. So all power to keep on improving, not chucking out the baby with the bathwater. But we have the really serious issue of things like PFAS compounds that the majority of our ag sprays contain. And if you're using wetters or foamers or similar, you can almost guarantee it. And and the majority of those are produced in China now, and we don't even know about the non-active ingredients in the drum because they don't have to detail those. So for anybody that doesn't know about PFAS, or that range of 15,000 odd chemicals, they're called forever chemicals. So there's a problem. So as far as soil goes in Australia, the biggest issue nowadays is not soil erosion, it is soil contamination. And I'll identify that clearly ahead of you hearing it because that's going to become clearer and clearer over time. If you've got stuff that's landing on there that is not degrading, we've got a big deal that we're all going to have to deal with, because we're getting it via our plastics and our cars and the stuff. So we're multiple exposures. So it's not all at ag's door, but let's work on what we can work on. So improvements to systems, as well as, in the end, great systemic change. Because if we are trying to get to a completely different direction, which essentially, in a global scale, we're being faced with that, and Tim mentioned about our resource use and our impact, I think the evidence is clear enough that we need a systemic change. So therefore, improvements on current systems, while very much keep doing it, may not be enough to produce some of the results that we need.
Did you want to add to that? I was just going to say, and that's probably why it's really important that you don't segregate the sustainable regenerative agricultural techniques from conventional agriculture, because they might want to get to the same outcome, but the incentives are just different. For example, you might not want to spray because you have environmental concerns, but they might not want to spray because they just don't want to spend as much money on that crop and they want to be more profitable. So keeping the conversations open and free between everyone, and then I'm sure there's some way to find a middle ground and for people to work together and sort of come to that same solution as well. Yeah.
I think we've moved beyond the polarising conversations that we're so used to these days, aren't we? Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, probably both of you can answer it, but about no-kill cropping, there will be competition, I guess, with whatever else is growing in that crop, and are farmers averse to trialling that or going full tilt through a no-kill system because they're worried about quality impacts on if they're harvesting, I guess, either of the crops. And is there an issue there with scale? So if you can get a yield benefit if you scale up, obviously, you can harvest more tonnage. But if you're a smaller farmer, then are you still able to really just no-kill crop and get a benefit in quality from your crop, as well as, I guess, telling the story about the low impact cropping system?
Okay, so the question is, does it work on small scale as equally as broader scale?
I'll start, but we want to keep on passing to Tim, because think about how, from my perspective, from an analyst, is sort of how exciting it is to have more strings to the bow, and that's what something like this does, because it doesn't only just it's a new crop, it's another thing we could do, but it actually shuffles everything else, doesn't it? You know, this affects everything else. If we can make it, especially with the adaptability that's been identified, there's a thing. So, yeah, back to scale, absolutely is one of the bits of excitement I have with this, because it's ultra low cost. So there is the entry point for, well, can I do it at a small scale or whatever? Well, this is actually a piece of machinery that you can have in the back of the shed, and you can cart it around with the ute. As long as you can drive around with the ute, you can be putting seed into the ground. You don't need to get a tractor. You know, that old saying about the only tractor you need on a place is a contractor, you know, if you're really talking business. That's where I'm excited, and why I made reference back to keeping people in our rural communities and everything, because if it's all about scale this way, then we are all cooked. There's no long-term win for that, because if the only way for business is to scale outwards, is then, you know, the bigger fish get the smaller fish until you've only got one fish left, but then you've got no community anyway. You've got no school bus run or footy team or all the rest of that. So my emphasis is to think about how you can scale up. So not only with something like no kill cropping, but think about shrubs and trees that are multiple use. That's what we've done on our place extensively. But it wasn't just we were planting trees for shade. No, tree for airflow, shade, fodder, you know, multiple use. So that's the sort of trying to engender the thinking that, you know, how can we do something that affects, and then a high value crop, you know, there's perhaps an in for, well, can that be done at small scale that is profitable?
And I think when you mentioned, you know, crops for multi-use as well, I think there's also with no-till and no-kill, I think it's sort of understanding what crops you want to be working with as well. So you might, if you have a veggie crop, you might not want a really high growing crop with it. So you might want a lower growing clover. It's just sort of understanding that, and I guess understanding the timing of the timing of certain crops as well within that system. I think also whether it's no kill or just very minor kill, I've seen some stuff in just the very sort of top, you know, inch of or less. It's like, it's almost like they sort of just chop the they go in and just sort of chop the grass that's in the soil, and that allows you to have like you have grass next to where you're drilling and putting the crop in the ground, and then you actually have sort of a clean line where you can actually put the seed in the ground, so it doesn't have competition right where it is and allows it to get up, but you still have almost, you know, the rest of your entire paddock is still growing that same crop that was there previously. You just have these single lines rather than going through and actually, you know, ripping up the whole crop and ploughing the whole paddock. You might just want to, you know, kill the sort of the top, you know, centimetre or so just to get a seed in the ground. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, if there's no more, Bruce, you're sort of touching on this, the great defoliation that's happening in the west of New South Wales. Is that what you call it?
Yes, but not, it's over the cropping zones of, not just on the mainland. I won't make a judgment of
not Tassie. No. And that's, you know, everyone's impacted by that. And then we've got this great monoculture in our supermarkets and in our finance systems, and you said there, so at that systems level, you know, have you got any sort of, it does seem like it's a, you know, we're in for a bit of trouble. Yeah. In all your travels, going around talking to farmers, you know, what are you seeing as the sort of the lighthouses? What are you seeing as the sort of ways out of this malaise of, as you said, you know, big fish, and there's one fish and there's no fish, and it's only at that point in time that one big fish realises there's nothing left to eat. And that's both a metaphorical thing and an actual reality. If you look at carbon markets and biodiversity markets and all these other things, you know, not really coming and facing this conundrum of, well, what are we going to eat?
So I think the question is, might have been a statement, is given the systems that, not just the agricultural system, but all the other systems that are supporting the current, you know, paradigm that we're living in, What evidence is there out there at the moment that's giving you hope that things are changing, or the tipping points are being reached or being tipped over into the right direction, if any?
Oh, well, I think, yes, I am always hopeful, and have a look around us to the proof of yesterday and today, and the fact that you've all attended here or contributed, and there's been a lot of work behind this, and we've really got to be thankful for all of those folk that have made this happen, because it didn't have to happen, did it? And there is probably the germplasm for everything to start. Do we have an idea that has genuine value? And I'd just refer back to the proposal that, well, if I want to have more farmers like myself out in my area, well then with grains there's got to be some differentiation, or else it's just going into the same big pile, and it's measured with protein and falling numbers tests, and that's it. And because they're ripping off higher yields off the same amount of area, well, we know that the nutrients must be diluted. It's a physical impossibility, scientific impossibility for that not to be the case. So some of it is government settings, and I know like Tammy Jonas would have been talking about abattoirs and that sort of thing. If anybody sat in on that, I didn't hear the talk, but there is the government settings that many years ago they decided, well, we're not going to have local butcher shops just killing a beast or two out the back. We'll make it very difficult for them. Change those settings back to something that's even playing field, because there's a lot of that embedded here that stops so many other things from happening. If you allowed that to happen, how many other direct supply meat operations could flourish everywhere from a government change setting? So here's another one that I'll throw out that's a bit of a hobby horse of mine. Is say home farm home loan. Simple fiduciary change, stroke of a pen, doesn't distort the market, but it saves our communities across the whole nation. Simple one. I'm not Prime Minister, so I can't make it happen, but take that one home with you. Yes, that's right, because I think it's totally apt that if off from your home farm, if you wish to purchase the farm next door, that's a commercial thing. But at the moment, it's actually weighted against keeping families in our rural communities, isn't it? Because if you're a bigger player, the bigger fish that's buying and everything, you're getting better terms than the other and using your existing equity. Somebody wanting to come in, that it's so wonderful that we've got such a more youthful demographic than most farming gatherings, I might say, at these 2 days, is that how's the entry point? Okay, well, yeah, you've got to be a 15-year loan max, and probably less at a higher interest rate, commercial interest rate, whereas a home loan is 25 or 30 years at a lower rate. And how does that affect people's behaviour straight away? If you're taking a stake and it's going to be your home, and you're saying, yep, I'm here for the next 25 or 30 years, your behaviour on that land is vastly different than trying to squeeze it out. So there are some government settings, shortening this up, there are government settings that quickly can flip things to the better, as well as us realising that we do have to have a value proposition. If I'm just growing oats, it's the same as everybody else's oats. No, I've got no value proposition for you. May as well buy it from the cheapest buyer.
Yeah, I think as well, whether you love or hate capitalism, it's a pretty pure democratic system, because we vote with our dollars, and so everything that we buy, we produce more of, because supply and demand. And so in order to get more people to purchase sustainable goods, then we need more people to be educated and understand it. So things like this event are perfect for that. I think, communicating what makes your grains more sustainable and special compared to the conventional production methods. I think that's really important, because the more people that understand it, the more people will buy it, which then brings more and more scale into the industry, brings down the costs, and then that's how I think you really create change in the system, is that people start to understand and actually buy into the system and vote with their dollars. So I think we just need more and more education, I think, on why these production systems are more sustainable, but also why these production systems create more nutrient dense foods as well, and how that sort of integrates into our well-being and our health. So I think as that starts to become more common knowledge, I think we'll see the growth in these products for sure.
I think that's a really good note to finish on. So let's thank Bruce and Tim very much for your participation today.